Ambassador Elena Vasquez looked out the small window of her transport ship as it moved through space toward Station Nexus 7. The massive space station looked like a giant metal flower floating in the darkness, with long arms stretching out in all directions. Each arm held docking bays for ships from different worlds across the galaxy. Elena had been working as Earth's top diplomat for 15 years. She was 53 years old with gray hair that she kept tied back in a neat bun. Her brown eyes showed the wisdom that came from years of dealing with alien species who thought very differently from humans. Today was the most important day of her career. For the past 3 years, Elena had been working on something called the Treaty of 12 Worlds. This treaty would create the first major alliance between humanity and the Galactic Confederation. The Confederation was a group of alien species that had been ruling most of the galaxy for over 2,000 years. They had advanced technology and powerful armies, but they were also very proud and set in their ways. Humans were still new to the galaxy. It had only been 50 years since Earth made first contact with aliens. Most of the older alien species looked down on humans as young and primitive. They thought humans were good for trade and maybe some basic diplomacy, but nothing more important than that. Elena knew this meeting could change everything. If the treaty was signed, humans would finally have a real place in galactic politics. They would be partners with some of the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. It was her life's work, and she was so close to making it happen. The transport ship docked at Station Nexus 7 with a soft bump. Elena gathered her papers and straightened her dark blue diplomatic uniform. She had worn this same uniform to hundreds of meetings over the years. The Earth symbol on her shoulder patch looked small compared to the elaborate designs worn by alien diplomats, but she wore it with pride. As Elena walked through the station's corridors, she saw beings from dozens of different worlds. There were the tall, thin Altarians with their silver skin and large black eyes. The Drakmori stomped by on their thick legs, their reptilian faces scarred from countless battles. Small groups of Stellaris floated past, their energy forms barely contained in special suits. But the most important aliens at this meeting were the Zephyrians. They were the leaders of the Galactic Confederation and had been for over 1,000 years. The Zephyrians looked somewhat like humans, but they were taller and thinner. Their skin was pale blue, and they had no hair on their heads. Instead, they had small crystals that grew from their scalps in complex patterns. The Zephyrians believed they were the most advanced species in the galaxy. They had ruled for so long that they thought it was their natural right. The idea that young species, like humans, might become their equals made them very angry. Many Zephyrians saw human expansion into space as a direct threat to their authority. Elena knew some Zephyrians opposed the treaty, but she believed most of them were reasonable beings who could see the benefits of working with humanity. Humans were excellent traders, innovative scientists, and skilled diplomats. They could bring new ideas and energy to the old Confederation. The main assembly hall of Station Nexus 7 was enormous. The ceiling was so high that Elena could barely see it. In the dim light, hundreds of seats were arranged in a circle around a central speaking area. Each section was designed for different alien species, with special atmosphere controls and seating that matched their physical needs. Elena took her place at the human delegation table. There were only 5 humans at the meeting compared to hundreds of aliens. This made Elena feel small but also determined. She represented all of humanity, and she would not let them down. The meeting began with the usual ceremonies and speeches. Different alien species talked about their history, their achievements, and their hopes for the future. Elena listened politely, even though she had heard similar speeches many times before. When it was her turn to speak, Elena walked to the center of the hall. Her footsteps echoed in the huge space. She looked around at all the different alien faces watching her. Some looked curious, others seemed bored, and a few appeared hostile. "Honored delegates," Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's speakers. "Today we have the chance to create something new. For too long, our species have remained separate, each following our own path through the stars. The Treaty of 12 Worlds offers us the opportunity to walk together toward a brighter future." Elena spoke for 20 minutes about the benefits of the treaty. She talked about shared trade routes, joint scientific research, and mutual defense agreements. She explained how humans could contribute to galactic civilization while learning from older, wiser species. Most of the aliens listened respectfully. The Altarians nodded their approval several times. Even some of the proud Drakmori seemed interested in what she had to say. But Elena noticed that the Zephyrian delegates sat perfectly still, their faces showing no emotion at all. After Elena finished speaking, the meeting broke for a meal. This was always Elena's favorite part of diplomatic meetings. Food was one of the few things that all species could share and enjoy together, even if their diets were very different. Elena was talking with an Altarian scientist about Earth's music when she noticed something strange. Several Zephyrians were moving through the crowd in a careful pattern. They were not socializing like everyone else. Instead, they seemed to be taking specific positions around the hall. A cold feeling grew in Elena's stomach. In her 15 years as a diplomat, she had learned to trust her instincts about danger. Something was wrong. Elena started to move toward the exit, but the Zephyrians moved faster. She heard a soft humming sound that she recognized immediately. It was the charging noise made by plasma weapons. "Everyone down!" Elena shouted, but her warning came too late. Bright blue bolts of plasma energy erupted from concealed positions around the hall. The bolts were aimed with deadly precision. Elena felt a burning pain in her chest as the first bolt hit her. She fell to the marble floor, her papers scattering around her dot. More plasma bolts filled the air. Other delegates screamed and ran for cover, but the attack was over in seconds. The Zephyrian shooters disappeared as quickly as they had appeared. Leaving behind chaos and death, Elena lay on the cold floor, feeling her life draining away. She could see her blood spreading across the beautiful white marble, mixing with the scattered pages of the treaty she had worked so hard to create. The irony was bitter. She had come here to build peace, and instead she had found war. Other beings rushed to help her, but Elena knew it was too late. She had been hit in the heart and lungs. Even with the best medical technology in the galaxy, she would not survive. As her vision began to fade, Elena thought about Earth. She thought about her daughter Sarah, who was serving as a captain in the human colonial navy. She thought about her husband David, who had died in a mining accident 10 years earlier. She thought about all the humans who had put their trust in her to secure their future among the stars. Elena Quota's last conscious thought was a prayer that her death would not destroy everything she had worked for. She hoped that wiser minds would find a way to preserve the peace. But Elena did not know her killers very well. The Zephyrians had not just murdered her. They had broadcast the assassination live to media outlets across the galaxy. Every major news network had cameras in the assembly hall. Billions of beings on thousands of worlds watched as Earth's top diplomat was gunned down during a peace conference. The Zephyrians thought this would be a message to humanity and other young species. They wanted to show that the old order would not change. They wanted to demonstrate that they still had the power to destroy anyone who challenged them. What the Zephyrians did not understand was that they had just made the biggest mistake in their species-long history. The news of Elena's assassination reached Earth's capital city of Geneva within hours. The Human Colonial Authority building was a tall tower of glass and steel that rose above Lake Geneva. Inside the building's command center, screens showed news feeds from across the galaxy. Admiral Marcus Chen was reviewing naval reports when his aide burst into his office. Chen was a stern man in his 60s with short gray hair and intelligent dark eyes. He had served in Earth's military for 40 years, rising through the ranks during humanity's expansion into space. "Sir, you need to see this immediately," the aide said, his face pale with shock. Chen watched the assassination footage 3 times without saying a word. His expression did not change, but his aide could see his hands slowly tighten into fists. When the recording ended, Chen sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, Chen reached for his secure communicator. He entered a code that had never been used before, a code that would alert every human military commander in the galaxy. "Mobilize," Chen said into the communicator. That single word would change the course of galactic history. Across human space, The mobilization order spread like wildfire. On Earth, military bases that had been quiet for decades suddenly burst into activity. Soldiers who had been on leave were called back to duty. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were converted to military production. On Mars, the massive shipyards began working around the clock. Ships that had been designed for exploration and trade were retrofitted with weapons and armor. New ships began rolling off the production lines at a rate that surprised even the humans themselves. In the asteroid belt, mining crews received new orders. Instead of extracting rare metals for electronics, they began mining iron and uranium for weapons. The huge mining ships were converted into mobile fortresses, their industrial equipment turned into devastating weapons of war. On the outer colonies, millions of humans who had lived peaceful lives as farmers, traders, and scientists suddenly found themselves preparing for war. They had never wanted to fight, but the murder of Ambassador Vasquez had awakened something deep in the human spirit. The galaxy was about to learn something that it had forgotten during 50 years of peaceful human expansion. Humans were the only species that had achieved faster-than-light travel while still actively fighting wars on their home planet. They were the only species that had developed their advanced technology through centuries of conflict. Other alien species had evolved beyond warfare before reaching the stars. They fought when necessary, but they followed ancient rules and traditions that limited the scope of their conflicts. War for them was a formal affair with established boundaries and acceptable outcomes. Humans were different. Humans had learned to fight total war, where the only acceptable outcome was complete victory. They had learned to turn their entire civilization into a weapon when threatened. They had learned to show no mercy to enemies who showed no mercy to them. The Zephyrians had wanted to send a message by murdering Elena Vasquez. They had succeeded beyond their wildest nightmares. The message they had sent was simple. Humanity was at war, and humanity did not fight by anyone else's rules. As news of the mobilization spread across the galaxy, other species began to watch humanity with new eyes. The peaceful traders and friendly diplomats were revealing their true nature. Humanity had been holding back, showing only their gentle side to galactic civilization. Now the mask was coming off, and what lay beneath would terrify the galaxy. President Sarah Kim stood at the window of her office in the Human Colonial Authority building, looking out at Lake Geneva. The water was calm and peaceful, reflecting the morning sunlight like a mirror. It was hard to believe that such a quiet scene existed on the same planet that was now preparing for the largest war in galactic history. Sarah was 45 years old with short black hair and sharp green eyes. She had been president of the Human Colonial Authority for only 2 years, but she had already proven herself to be a strong leader. Before entering politics, she had served as a trade negotiator, traveling to dozens of alien worlds to establish commercial relationships. Sarah had known Elena Vasquez personally. They had worked together on several trade agreements before Elena became Earth's chief diplomat. The news of Elena's assassination had hit Sarah like a physical blow, but she could not allow her personal grief to cloud her judgment. She had to think about what was best for all of humanity. The secure door to Sarah's office opened, and Admiral Chen entered along with General Patricia Moore, the head of the Human Colonial Marines. General Moore was a tough woman in her 50s, with red hair that was starting to turn gray. She had fought in the Titan Rebellion 15 years earlier, and had earned a reputation as one of humanity's finest military tacticians. "Madam President," Admiral Chen said, "we need to discuss our response options." Sarah turned away from the window and walked to her desk. The desk was made of wood from Earth's forests, a reminder of humanity's home world. On the desk were reports from intelligence services, military assessments, and diplomatic communications from across the galaxy. "What are our assets?" Sarah asked. General Moore opened her tablet and began reading. "We currently have 437 major warships spread across human space. Another 200 ships are in various stages of construction. Our ground forces total approximately 2 million active personnel, with reserves that could expand that number to 8 million within 6 months. Sarah nodded. These numbers seemed impressive, but they were tiny compared to the military might of the Galactic Confederation. The Zephyrians alone had over 3,000 major warships, and they could call on the fleets of a dozen allied species. What about our industrial capacity? Sarah asked. Admiral Chen leaned forward. This is where things get interesting, Madam President. Our official military production is limited by the various arms control treaties we signed with the Confederation. But our civilian industries are massive and largely unregulated. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Explain. Our merchant marine is enormous, Chen continued. We have over 10,000 civilian ships of various sizes operating throughout the galaxy. Most of them are lightly built compared to warships, but they could be converted for military use. Our mining and construction industries are also far larger than most alien species realize. General Moore added. The aliens think of us as traders and diplomats because that's what we've shown them. They don't understand that our entire civilization is built on a foundation of industrial warfare capabilities, left over from our pre-space flight period. Sarah understood. Humans had developed faster than light travel while still fighting major wars on Earth. Their technology had advanced through military necessity, not peaceful exploration like most alien species. Even their civilian industries were designed with the potential for military conversion in mind. What about the political situation? Sarah asked. Admiral Chen's expression darkened. The Galactic Confederation is treating this as an isolated incident. They claim the assassination was carried out by rogue elements within the Zephyrian government. They're offering to conduct an investigation and provide compensation to Elena's family. Compensation, Sarah said, her voice cold with anger. They think they can pay us off like we're some primitive tribe. It gets worse, General Moore said. Our intelligence sources report that several Confederation species are viewing this as a test. They want to see if humanity will accept this treatment and remain in our assigned place in the galactic hierarchy. Sarah sat down in her chair and thought for several minutes. The two military leaders waited patiently. They had worked with Sarah long enough to know that she was not someone who made hasty decisions, especially decisions that could affect the fate of humanity. Finally, Sarah looked up. What would total war look like? Admiral Chen and General Moore exchanged glances. They had been hoping she would ask this question, but they were also afraid of it. Total war means we abandon all treaty limitations on military production, Admiral Chen said. We convert our entire industrial base to military purposes. We mobilize every human in the galaxy for the war effort. We fight not just to win battles, but to completely destroy our enemy's ability to wage war. General Moore continued. It means we use every advantage we have, regardless of galactic conventions about warfare. It means we show the galaxy what human military doctrine really looks like when we're not holding back. Sarah stood up and walked to a wall that displayed a map of the galaxy. Human territory was marked in blue, a relatively small cluster of systems compared to the vast territories controlled by the Confederation species. But Sarah knew that size was not everything in warfare. How long would it take to implement full mobilization? She asked. 6 months to reach peak production, Admiral Chen replied. But we could begin showing results within weeks. Sarah made her decision. She walked back to her desk and pressed a button that activated the emergency session protocol for the Human Colonial Council. Within minutes, representatives from every human world would be connected to a secure communication network. The main screen in Sarah's office lit up with dozens of faces. These were the elected representatives of humanity's colonies, the people who spoke for billions of humans scattered across hundreds of worlds. Sarah could see the tension and grief in their faces. They all knew why they had been called together. Fellow citizens, Sarah began. 6 hours ago, Ambassador Elena Vasquez was murdered while attempting to negotiate a peace treaty with the Galactic Confederation. The assassination was broadcast live across the galaxy as a deliberate insult to humanity. Angry voices filled the communication channel, but Sarah held up her hand for silence. The Galactic Confederation has responded to this murder with silence and empty promises of investigation. They have made it clear that they do not consider the life of a human diplomat to be of any importance. They have shown us exactly what they think of humanity's place in the galaxy. Sarah paused to let her words sink in. Today I am asking you to authorize the withdrawal of humanity from all existing treaties with alien species. I am asking you to recall all diplomatic personnel from alien worlds, and I am asking you to invoke Article 7 of the Human Colonial Charter. A shocked silence filled the channel. Article 7 had been written into the Charter 50 years ago, but it had never been used. Article 7 authorized the complete mobilization of human civilization for total war. Representative Johnson from the Mars colonies was the first to speak. Madam President, are you asking us to declare war on the entire Galactic Confederation? I am asking you to declare that humanity will no longer accept the role of a junior partner in galactic civilization, Sarah replied. I am asking you to declare that the murder of our diplomats will have consequences. I am asking you to show the galaxy what happens when humanity goes to war without restraint. The vote was not even close. Every single human colony voted to authorize Article 7. In the 50-year history of human space exploration, the colonial representatives had never been so united on any issue. As the communication ended, Sarah felt the weight of history on her shoulders. She had just committed humanity to a path that could lead to either galactic domination or complete destruction. There would be no middle ground. Within hours of the vote, the transformation began. Across human space, civilian authorities took control of all industrial production. Factory owners who had been making household goods received new orders to produce weapons and armor. Shipyards that had been building passenger liners began constructing warships. On Earth itself, the changes were dramatic. The city of Detroit, which had been the center of human automotive production for over a century, became the center of military vehicle production. Factories that had been making cars and trucks began producing tanks and armored personnel carriers. In orbit around Earth, massive space elevators carried a constant stream of raw materials up from the planet's surface. These materials were processed in automated factories that worked around the clock to produce everything from small arms ammunition to the complex electronics needed for spaceship navigation systems. The asteroid belt became humanity's primary source of raw materials for the war effort. Mining ships that had been extracting rare metals for luxury goods began mining iron, uranium, and other materials needed for military production. The asteroids contained enough resources to supply a war effort for decades. On Mars, the famous shipyards of Olympus City expanded at an incredible rate. New construction bays were built in weeks using prefabricated modules. The red planet's low gravity made it ideal for building large spacecraft, and soon the Martian shipyards were producing more military vessels than the rest of the galaxy combined. The outer colonies contributed in their own ways. Europa became a major center for producing military electronics, taking advantage of the moon's low radiation environment. Titan's chemical industries began producing explosives and rocket fuel on a massive scale. Even the tiny research stations on the edge of human space were converted to support the war effort. But the most dramatic changes were in the human military itself. Officers who had spent their careers managing small peacekeeping forces suddenly found themselves in command of vast armies. Soldiers who had trained for police actions and humanitarian missions received new training in total warfare tactics. Admiral Chen established his headquarters on Luna, Earth's moon. From there, he could coordinate the activities of human fleets across the galaxy. The Luna Command Center was expanded from a small administrative facility to a massive military complex that operated 24 hours a day. General Moore set up her headquarters on Mars, where she could oversee the training of new Marine battalions. The Red Planet's harsh environment was perfect for preparing soldiers for warfare in hostile conditions. Soon, hundreds of thousands of new Marines were graduating from Martian training camps every month. The speed of the transformation amazed even the humans themselves. Within weeks, their military production had increased by 500%. Within months, they were producing more weapons and spacecraft than they had in the previous 50 years combined. But the most important change was not in humanity's industrial capacity, it was in their attitude. For 50 years, humans had been trying to fit in with galactic civilization. They had followed alien rules, accepted alien traditions, and tried to prove that they were civilized and peaceful. The assassination of Elena Vasquez had changed all of that. Humans were no longer interested in proving themselves to alien species. They were no longer willing to accept a subordinate role in galactic politics. They were no longer going to fight by anyone else's rules. The galaxy was about to learn what humans were really capable of when they stopped holding back. The other species had grown comfortable with humanity's reputation as peaceful traders and skilled diplomats. They had forgotten that humans were the only species to develop space travel while still waging wars on their home planet. They were about to be reminded of that fact in the most dramatic way possible. Captain Lisa Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the HSS Retribution, watching as her ship moved through hyperspace toward the Kepler Junction. The Retribution was one of the new Avenger-class battleships that had been built in the Martian shipyards over the past 6 months. It was sleek and deadly, designed specifically for the kind of warfare that humans excelled at. Lisa was 34 years old with brown hair that she kept tied back in a military regulation bun. She had dark eyes that missed nothing and a calm voice that could be heard clearly even during the chaos of battle. She had been serving in the human colonial navy for 12 years, working her way up from a junior navigation officer to command of her own ship. Lisa had known Ambassador Vasquez personally. Elena had been a friend of Lisa's mother, and Lisa had met her several times at family gatherings when she was younger. The ambassador's murder had affected Lisa deeply, but she had channeled her grief and anger into determination to make the Zephyrians pay for their crime. The Retribution was leading a human task force of 20 ships towards Zephyrian space. It was the first major human military operation since the Mobilization began 6 months earlier. Lisa knew that the entire galaxy would be watching to see how humans fought when they were truly angry. "Captain," said Lieutenant Commander Harrison, the ship's tactical officer, "we're receiving a transmission from Admiral Chen." Lisa nodded. "Put him through." Admiral Chen's face appeared on the main screen. Behind him, Lisa could see the busy command center of Luna Station, where dozens of officers were coordinating human military operations across the galaxy. "Captain Rodriguez," Chen said, "you are about to engage the enemy for the first time since this war began. Your orders are simple. Demonstrate to the galaxy what unrestricted human warfare looks like. Show them no mercy, but follow the rules of warfare regarding civilian targets." Lisa straightened in her command chair. "Understood, sir. What are my engagement parameters?" "Destroy any military target you encounter," Chen replied. "If they surrender, accept it. If they don't surrender, destroy them completely. The galaxy needs to understand that humanity does not fight by their rules. We fight to win, and we fight until our enemies can no longer threaten us." The transmission ended, and Lisa turned to address her crew. The bridge of the Retribution held 20 officers and technicians, all of them trained in the new combat doctrines that human military academies had developed over the past months. "You all heard the Admiral," Lisa said. "Today we show the galaxy what happens when you murder our diplomats. Today we show them what human warfare really looks like. All stations, prepare for combat." The Kepler Junction was a strategic location where several hyperspace routes met. It was heavily fortified by the Zephyrians, who used it as a major military staging area. Intelligence reports indicated that the Zephyrian Third Fleet was stationed there, consisting of approximately 60 ships of various sizes. As the human task force dropped out of hyperspace, Lisa could see the enemy fleet waiting for them. The Zephyrian ships were beautiful in their own way, with smooth curves and elegant designs that reflected their advanced technology. But Lisa was not impressed by their appearance. She was interested only in their combat capabilities. "Enemy fleet detected," reported Lieutenant Stevens from the sensor station. 63 ships total. Composition matches our intelligence reports." Lisa nodded. The humans were outnumbered 3-1, but they had advantages that the Zephyrians did not understand. Human ships were built differently from alien vessels. They were designed for the kind of brutal, close-range combat that humans had perfected during centuries of warfare on Earth. "Communications, hail the enemy fleet," Lisa ordered. A moment later, the face of a Zephyrian admiral appeared on the screen. He was tall and thin, with pale blue skin and the crystal formations on his head. that marked him as a member of the noble class. His expression showed supreme confidence and barely concealed contempt for the humans. "I am Admiral Zarthek of the Zephyrian Third Fleet," he said in the universal translation language. "You are trespassing in Confederation space. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." Lisa smiled coldly. "I am Captain Rodriguez of the Human Colonial Navy. You are harboring the murderers of our diplomat. Surrender now or be destroyed." Admiral Zarthek's expression showed surprise and then amusement. "You dare to threaten the Third Fleet with 20 primitive ships? Your species has forgotten its place in the galaxy, we will remind you." The transmission ended, and Lisa turned to her tactical officer. "Battle stations. All ships attack Formation Alpha. Target their command ships first." The human ships moved into formation with a precision that surprised the watching Zephyrians. Most alien species fought space battles like naval encounters from ancient times, with ships arranged in neat lines firing at long range according to formal rules of engagement. Humans fought differently. Their ships moved in coordinated groups, using advanced computer systems to share targeting data and coordinate their attacks. They had studied the tactical mistakes made by alien species and developed countermeasures for every common strategy. The battle began when the Zephyrian fleet opened fire with their plasma cannons. Bright blue bolts of energy streaked across the darkness of space, striking the human ships' shields and armor. The Zephyrians expected the humans to respond with similar, long-range weapons fire. Instead, the human ships accelerated to maximum speed and charged directly at the enemy fleet. This was something the Zephyrians had never seen before. In their experience, space battles were fought at long range with careful positioning and formal tactics. "All weapons, fire at will," Lisa ordered. The Retribution's main guns opened fire, sending streams of magnetically accelerated projectiles toward the nearest Zephyrian ship. Unlike plasma bolts, these projectiles could not be deflected by energy shields. They punched through armor plating like bullets through paper. Around the Retribution, the other human ships were using their own preferred weapons. Some fired gravity, torpedoes that could crush enemy ships from the inside. Others used quantum disruptors that tore apart the molecular structure of anything they hit. A few ships even deployed nuclear mines that created massive explosions in the vacuum of space. But the most shocking weapon was the human willingness to ram enemy ships when their ammunition ran low. The HSS Determination, after expending all, its missiles accelerated to ramming speed and drove directly into a Zephyrian cruiser. Both ships were destroyed in the collision, but the psychological effect on the enemy was devastating. Admiral Zarthek watched in horror as his elegant fleet was torn apart by the savage human attack. His ships were individually superior to the human vessels, but they had never faced an enemy that fought with such brutal efficiency. The humans ignored all the traditional rules of space warfare and used every possible advantage to destroy their enemies. "All ships retreat to defensive positions," Zarthek ordered, but it was too late. The human ships were moving too fast and hitting too hard. His fleet was being destroyed piece by piece. The battle lasted only 47 minutes. When it was, over 51 Zephyrian ships had been destroyed or crippled. Only 12 managed to escape, and most of those were damaged. The human task force had lost only 3 ships, though several others were badly damaged. Lisa looked at the tactical display showing the wreckage of the enemy fleet floating in space. She felt no satisfaction at the destruction, only grim determination to continue the job that had been started. "Communications, send a message to the escaping ships," Lisa ordered. A moment later, she was speaking directly to Admiral Zarthek, whose command ship was limping away from the battle scene with its engines barely functional. "Admiral," Lisa said, "I want you to deliver a message to your government. Tell them that this is what happens when you murder human diplomats. Tell them that we don't fight by your rules. We fight to win, and we will keep fighting until our enemies can no longer threaten us." Admiral Zarthek's face showed shock and fear. "This is not how civilized species conduct warfare," he said. "There are rules, traditions, honor codes that must be followed." Lisa's expression remained cold. "Ambassador Vasquez was trying to negotiate a peace treaty when your people murdered her. You want to talk about honor? You want to talk about civilized behavior? You forfeited any claim to honor when you killed an unarmed diplomat during a peace conference. The transmission ended, and Lisa turned to her crew. Damage reports from all ships. Begin recovery operations for our casualties, and send word to Admiral Chen that the Kepler Junction is now under human control. News of the battle spread across the galaxy within hours. The alien media networks had expected the humans to be easily defeated by the superior Zephyrian fleet. Instead, they found themselves reporting on the complete destruction of one of the Confederation's most powerful military units. The reaction among different alien species varied greatly. The Altarians, who had always maintained friendly relations with humanity, expressed concern about the escalating conflict but refrained from taking sides. The Drachmori, who respected military prowess above all else, began to view humanity with newfound interest and caution. The Stellar Consortium, a group of merchant species, immediately began calculating the economic impact of a prolonged war. They realized that their trade networks would be severely disrupted if the conflict spread, and they started making quiet overtures about possible mediation. But it was the reaction among the smaller, younger species that was most significant. For centuries, these species had accepted their subordinate role in the galactic hierarchy, because they believed the older species were too powerful to challenge. The human victory at Kepler Junction showed them that even the mighty Zephyrians could be defeated. On dozens of worlds, species that had been oppressed by the Confederation began to whisper about the possibility of freedom. They watched the human news broadcasts and saw Captain Rodriguez calmly explaining that humans did not fight by anyone else's rules. They saw the wreckage of the Zephyrian fleet and began to believe that change was possible. The Zephyrian government reacted with shock and outrage. For over 1,000 years, they had been the dominant military power in the galaxy. No one had ever defeated one of their fleets so decisively. The loss of the Third Fleet was not just a military disaster. It was a threat to their entire worldview. Emergency sessions were called in the Zephyrian capital. Military commanders demanded immediate reinforcements to prevent further human advances. Political leaders argued about whether to seek peace or to escalate the conflict. Religious authorities proclaimed that the humans were a threat to the natural order of the universe. But while the Zephyrians argued among themselves, the humans continued their advance. Admiral Chen had not sent just one task force into enemy territory. Dozens of human fleets were moving through space, each one targeting strategic locations throughout the Confederation. The war that had begun with the assassination of a single diplomat was becoming a galactic conflict that would reshape the balance of power among the stars. And the humans were just getting started. Lisa Rodriguez and her crew prepared for their next mission, knowing that they were part of something much larger than a simple military campaign. They were part of humanity's declaration that they would no longer accept a subordinate role in galactic civilization. The galaxy was learning a hard lesson about what happened when you underestimated the human capacity for warfare. And this was only the beginning. The Altarian embassy on Station Harmony was one of the most beautiful buildings in the galaxy. Its silver walls seemed to flow like water, and soft blue lights created a peaceful atmosphere that was supposed to encourage diplomatic discussion. Today, however, the embassy was filled with tension as representatives from dozens of alien species gathered for an emergency meeting. Ambassador Veltar of the Altarian Empire was a tall, graceful being with silver skin and large black eyes that reflected wisdom accumulated over 3 centuries of life. She had served as a diplomat for over 100 years and had never seen the galaxy in such chaos. The human war against the Zephyrians had been raging for 8 months, and the conflict was spreading beyond anyone's ability to control it. "The situation is becoming impossible," declared Ambassador Korth of the Drachmori. The reptilian warrior diplomat was pacing back and forth across the embassy's main conference room, his thick tail swishing with agitation. "Human fleets have destroyed 17 Zephyrian military installations and captured 4 entire star systems. Our trade routes are being disrupted, our colonies are demanding protection, and some species are beginning to question the authority of the Confederation itself." Ambassador Veltar nodded sadly. "The humans are fighting unlike any species we have encountered before. They do not seem interested in achieving limited objectives or negotiating favorable terms. They appear to be fighting for the complete destruction of Zephyrian military power. The meeting had been called by the Stellar Consortium, a group of merchant species who were suffering massive economic losses due to the war. Their representative, a small blue being named Trader Zix, stood at the center of the room holding a data tablet filled with disturbing statistics. The economic impact is catastrophic, Zix announced in his high-pitched voice. Trade volume has declined by 47% in the affected sectors. Insurance costs for merchant vessels have increased by 300%. Several major shipping companies have declared bankruptcy. If this conflict continues, it will cause a galaxy-wide economic collapse. Around the room, other alien diplomats murmured their agreement. The war between humans and Zephyrians was affecting everyone, even species that had no direct involvement in the conflict. Ambassador Telnock of the Meridian Council raised one of his forearms for attention. His species looked like giant praying mantises with purple exoskeletons and compound eyes. Perhaps it is time to consider mediation. Both sides have demonstrated their military capabilities. Surely they can be convinced to negotiate a settlement. Several other diplomats nodded, but Ambassador Korth shook his massive reptilian head. "You do not understand human psychology," he said. "I have studied their history extensively since this war began. Humans do not fight the way we do. When they go to war, they fight until their enemies surrender unconditionally or are destroyed completely. They have no concept of limited warfare or acceptable losses." Ambassador Veltar consulted her own data tablet. "Korth is correct. Our intelligence services have analyzed human military history going back thousands of years. They have fought hundreds of major wars on their home planet, and the pattern is always the same. They continue fighting until their enemies can no longer resist. They call it total war, and it is unlike anything we have seen in galactic civilization." This information troubled the alien diplomats. Most species in the galaxy had evolved beyond primitive warfare before developing space travel. Their conflicts were usually resolved through formal combat between limited numbers of warriors, with clear rules about what was and was not acceptable. The idea of mobilizing an entire civilization for war was foreign to them. "What do the humans want?" asked Ambassador Cisara of the Neural Collective. Her species consisted of energy beings who rarely involved themselves in physical conflicts. What would it take to convince them to stop this war? Ambassador Veltar activated a holographic display that showed recent human communications. According to our intelligence sources, Admiral Chen has given the same response to all diplomatic overtures. He demands that the Zephyrians surrender. The individuals responsible for Ambassador Vasquez's assassination for trial by human courts. He also demands that the Zephyrian government formally acknowledge human equality in galactic affairs. "Those are reasonable demands," observed Ambassador Colven of the Crystalline Hegemony. "The Zephyrians refuse to consider them," replied Ambassador Korth. "They claim that surrendering their own citizens to alien justice would be a violation of their sovereignty. They also refuse to acknowledge human equality, because it would undermine their entire political system, which is based on the belief that they are the rightfully dominant species in the galaxy." The room fell silent as the diplomats contemplated this information. They were facing a classic diplomatic deadlock, but one with consequences that could destroy galactic civilization. Ambassador Veltar decided to share the most disturbing intelligence her government had gathered. "There is something else you need to know. Our military analysts believe that the humans are not fighting at their full capacity. They estimate that humanity has mobilized less than 30% of their total industrial and military potential for this war." This revelation shocked the alien diplomats. The human military performance had already exceeded everyone's expectations. The idea that they were holding back was terrifying. "How is that possible?" asked Trader Zix. "Our economic projections show that human military production has increased by over 500% since the war began. Humans have a unique industrial system," Ambassador Korth explained. "Most species develop specialized industries for military and civilian purposes. Humans developed their technology during periods of total war, so their civilian industries can be rapidly converted to military production. Their merchant ships can become warships. Their mining equipment can become weapons. Their entire civilization is designed to support warfare when necessary. Ambassador Veltar added, "Our intelligence also suggests that humans have been developing military technologies in secret for decades. They have weapons and ships that we have never seen before. The vessels they used to defeat the Zephyrian Third Fleet were completely unknown to our databases." While the alien diplomats discussed the growing crisis, the war itself was expanding beyond anyone's ability to control it. Human fleets were advancing through Zephyrian space like an unstoppable tide, destroying military installations and capturing strategic locations. The siege of Arcturus Station was typical of human military operations during this period. Arcturus was a massive space station that served as the headquarters for the Zephyrian Fourth Fleet. It was heavily fortified and defended by over 200 ships, making it one of the strongest military positions in the galaxy. Admiral Sarah Chen, the younger sister of Admiral Marcus Chen, commanded the human forces attacking Arcturus. She had developed a reputation as one of humanity's most innovative military commanders, specializing in siege warfare and planetary assault operations. Sarah's fleet consisted of only 60 ships, but they included several of the new Devastator-class battleships that had been built specifically for attacking fortified positions. These massive vessels carried weapons that could crack open space stations like eggs. "Begin the bombardment," Sarah ordered from the bridge of her flagship, the HSS Nemesis. The human ships opened fire with weapons that the defenders had never seen before. Gravity cannons created localized gravitational fields that crushed sections of the station's hull. Quantum torpedoes phased through shield generators and exploded inside the station's vital systems. Plasma lances cut through armor plating like hot knives through butter. But the most devastating weapons were the singularity bombs. These devices created tiny black holes that consumed everything in their immediate vicinity before collapsing safely. 3 direct hits from singularity bombs left massive holes in Arcturus Station's structure. The battle lasted 12 hours. When it was over, Arcturus Station was a broken wreck drifting in space. The Zephyrian Fourth Fleet had been completely destroyed, and over 50,000 Zephyrian military personnel were dead or captured. Admiral Sarah Chen broadcast a message to the surviving Zephyrian forces in the system. "This is what happens when you murder our diplomats. Surrender now or share the fate of Arcturus Station." The psychological impact of the siege was enormous. Arcturus Station had been considered one of the most secure military installations in the galaxy. Its destruction demonstrated that nowhere in Zephyrian space was safe from human attack. More importantly, the humans had accomplished the siege with minimal casualties. Only 4 human ships had been destroyed, and fewer than 2,000 human personnel had been killed. The efficiency of their victory was almost as frightening as the destruction they had caused. News of the siege reached Earth within hours, where President Kim was meeting with her military advisors. The war had been going on for 8 months, and the results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Human forces had won every major engagement, captured dozens of star systems, and destroyed over half of the Zephyrian military fleet. "The aliens are beginning to panic," reported Director Thompson of Human Intelligence Services. "Our sources indicate that several species are considering breaking their alliances with the Zephyrians. The Meridian Council has withdrawn its fleet from the border regions. The crystalline hegemony is refusing to provide material support to the Zephyrian war effort." President Kim nodded with satisfaction. "What about the Zephyrians themselves?" "They're divided," Thompson replied. "The military faction wants to continue fighting, but they're running out of ships and personnel. The political faction wants to negotiate, but they can't accept our terms without destroying their entire government structure. The religious faction believes this is some kind of cosmic test that they must endure." General Moore, who had been listening to the briefing, spoke up. "Madam President, I believe we're approaching the end of the conventional phase of this war. The Zephyrians can't match our military production or tactical capabilities, but they may resort to desperate measures if we push them too far." President Kim understood the warning. Desperate enemies were dangerous enemies, especially when they possessed advanced technology and powerful weapons. What do you recommend, General? We need to give them a way to surrender without losing face, Moore replied. If we back them into a corner with no way out, they might do something catastrophic. Species fighting for their survival are capable of anything. President Kim considered this advice. The war had been successful beyond humanity's wildest dreams, but success brought its own dangers. The galaxy was watching to see what humans would do with their newfound power. The wrong decision could turn potential allies into enemies and create new conflicts that would be even more destructive than the current war. Outside the president's window, Lake Geneva reflected the afternoon sunlight. It was the same peaceful scene that had greeted her 8 months earlier, when she had authorized the mobilization of human civilization for total war. But everything had changed since then. Humanity was no longer a junior partner in galactic civilization. They had proven themselves to be one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy. The question now was what they would do with that power. The aliens were watching, waiting to see whether humanity would be a force for justice or just another conquering empire. The decisions made in the coming weeks would determine the fate of galactic civilization for centuries to come. The massive human fleet hung in space around Zephyr Prime like a dark cloud blocking out the stars. Over 300 human warships surrounded the Zephyrian homeworld, the largest military force humanity had ever assembled. The flagship of this armada was the HSS Retribution, now commanded by Admiral Lisa Rodriguez, who had been promoted after her victories in the early stages of the war. Admiral Marcus Chen stood on the observation deck of the Retribution, looking down at the blue and green world that had been the center of galactic civilization for over 1,000 years. Zephyr Prime was beautiful, with elegant cities that seemed to grow naturally from the landscape and orbital platforms that gleamed like jewels in the sunlight. It was hard to believe that this peaceful-looking world had been the source of so much arrogance and cruelty. The war had lasted exactly 1 year, 3 months and 17 days. In that time, human forces had destroyed or captured over 80% of the Zephyrian military fleet, occupied 37 star systems, and brought the galactic economy to the brink of collapse. The Zephyrians had lost over 2 million military personnel, and countless civilians in the systems that had been evacuated during the human advance. But Chen took no pleasure in the destruction. He was tired of war, tired of making decisions that resulted in death and suffering across the galaxy. The assassination of Elena Vasquez had started this conflict, but it had grown far beyond simple revenge. Humanity had proven its point many times over. Now it was time to end the fighting and build something better from the ashes. "Admiral," said Captain Rodriguez, approaching from the bridge, "we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian government. They're requesting permission to discuss surrender terms." Chen nodded. "Put them through in my ready room. And Rodriguez, have representatives from the other alien species standing by. I want them to witness whatever happens next." A few minutes later, Chen was sitting across a conference table from High Chancellor Zarethis of the Zephyrian Empire. The Zephyrian leader looked older than his species normally aged, with stress lines around his large eyes and crystal formations on his head that had lost their usual lustrous shine. The weight of his civilization's defeat was visible in every aspect of his appearance. "Admiral Chen," Zarethis said in the universal translation language, "I have come to discuss the terms of our surrender." Chen studied the alien leader for a moment before responding. "High Chancellor, before we discuss terms, I need to know if you understand why this war happened. Do you understand what your people did wrong?" Zarethis shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Your species has demonstrated superior military capabilities. We acknowledge your strength and are prepared to accept the consequences of our defeat." Chen shook his head. "That's not what I asked. This war didn't happen because of military capabilities. It happened because your people murdered an unarmed diplomat who was trying to negotiate a peace treaty. It happened because you thought you could intimidate humanity into accepting a subordinate role in galactic civilization." The Zephyrian leader was silent for several minutes. Finally, he spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "We believed that we were the rightful rulers of the galaxy. Our species had held that position for over 1,000 years. The idea that younger species like yours might become our equals was difficult to accept. Ambassador Vasquez wasn't trying to become your equal, Chen replied. She was trying to create a partnership that would benefit everyone. Your people killed her because they couldn't stand the thought of sharing power with anyone else. Zarathus looked down at the table. We were wrong. The price of our pride has been the near destruction of our civilization. We beg for mercy. Chen leaned back in his chair and activated a holographic display showing the current military situation. Human fleets controlled most of former Zephyrian space, while the remnants of the Zephyrian fleet were scattered and demoralized. High Chancellor, you need to understand something about human psychology, Chen said. We don't fight wars to conquer other species or to build empires. We fight wars to solve problems. The problem in this case was that your government thought it could murder our diplomats without consequences. That problem needs to be solved permanently. Zarathus raised his head hopefully. What would it take to solve this problem? Chen had been thinking about this moment for months. President Kim had given him broad authority to negotiate surrender terms, but she had been clear about humanity's core requirements. First, Chen said, the individuals responsible for Ambassador Vasquez's assassination must be surrendered to human authorities for trial. This includes not just the shooters, but the officials who planned and authorized the attack. The Zephyrian leader nodded reluctantly. That can be arranged. Second, the Zephyrian government must formally acknowledge the equality of all species in galactic affairs. The age of Zephyrian dominance is over. From now on, all species will have an equal voice in galactic governance. This demand was more difficult for Zarathus to accept. Such an acknowledgement would require fundamental changes to our entire political system. Yes, it would, Chen agreed. Your political system is based on the belief that your species is naturally superior to all others. That belief is what led to this war. It has to change. Zarathus was quiet for a long time, considering the implications. Finally, he nodded his agreement. Third, Chen continued, all species that were oppressed or exploited by the Zephyrian Empire will receive full independence and compensation for past injustices. This demand would be expensive for the Zephyrians, but Zarathus understood that he had no choice but to accept it. And finally, Chen said, the Zephyrian military will be limited to defensive forces only. You will not be allowed to maintain the massive fleets that you use to dominate other species. When Chen finished speaking, Zarathus sat in silence for several minutes. These terms would fundamentally change Zephyrian civilization, stripping away the power and prestige that his species had enjoyed for over a millennium, but the alternative was complete destruction. I accept these terms, Zarathus said finally. When will you begin the occupation of our remaining worlds? Chen smiled for the first time in months. High Chancellor, I think you still don't understand how humans think about war. We're not interested in occupying your worlds. We're not interested in ruling your people. We just want to make sure that you never again think you can murder our diplomats without consequences. The surrender ceremony was held on Station Nexus 7, in the same assembly hall where Ambassador Elena Vasquez had been murdered 13 months earlier. Representatives from dozens of alien species attended, along with media outlets from across the galaxy. The ceremony was broadcast live to billions of beings on thousands of worlds. President Kim led the human delegation, wearing the same dark blue uniform that Elena had worn on the day she died. On the podium beside her was a holographic image of the murdered ambassador, a reminder of why this war had been necessary. High Chancellor Zarathus signed the surrender documents with shaking hands, formally ending the Zephyrian Empire and establishing a new galactic order based on equality among species rather than domination by the strong over the weak. When the ceremony was complete, President Kim addressed the assembled representatives. Today marks the end of a tragic chapter in galactic history, she said. Ambassador Elena Vasquez came to this hall to build peace between our species. She was murdered because some beings could not accept the idea that all species deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. Kim paused and looked around the hall, making eye contact with representatives from dozens of different worlds. The war that followed was not about revenge. though many of you may have thought it was. It was about establishing a principle that must never again be violated. Diplomatic personnel are sacred, and their murder will have consequences that no civilization can survive. Kim gestured toward the human military officers standing around the hall. You have seen what happens when humanity goes to war without restraint. We prefer peace. It's more profitable and less wasteful. But never mistake our preference for peace as weakness. Never assume that you can intimidate us or treat us as subordinates. And never ever think that you can murder our diplomats without facing the full wrath of human civilization. The hall was completely silent as Kim's words were translated into dozens of alien languages. Today we establish a new galactic confederation based on equality, respect, and mutual cooperation. All species will have an equal voice in galactic governance. All species will be protected from domination by others. And all species will be held accountable for their actions. Kim walked over to the holographic image of Elena Vasquez and placed her hand on the memorial plaque that had been installed in the ambassador's honor. Elena, your dream of galactic peace has finally been achieved, just not in the way you had hoped. Your sacrifice was not in vain. The galaxy will remember your name and the principles you died for. As the ceremony ended and the representatives began to leave, Admiral Chen approached President Kim. Madam President, what happens now? Our fleets control half the galaxy. Our industrial capacity is still operating at wartime levels, and every alien species is afraid of us. How do we transition from war to peace? Kim looked around the assembly hall, thinking about all the changes that would need to be made. We do what humans have always done after winning a war, Marcus. We help our former enemies rebuild, we establish new institutions to prevent future conflicts, and we prove that our victory was worth the cost. Chen nodded, understanding the enormous challenge ahead. Winning the war had been the easy part. Building a lasting peace would be much more difficult. Over the following months, human administrators worked with alien governments to establish the new galactic order. War crimes trials were held for the Zephyrians responsible for Elena's assassination. Reparations were paid to species that had been oppressed by the old empire. New institutions were created to prevent future conflicts. The transformation was not easy. Many Zephyrians struggled to accept their new status as equals rather than rulers. Some alien species were suspicious of human motives, wondering if humanity would become the new dominant power in the galaxy. A few radical groups on various worlds tried to restart conflicts, but they were quickly suppressed by the new galactic peacekeeping forces. But slowly, carefully, a new kind of galactic civilization began to emerge. Trade resumed on a more equitable basis. Scientific cooperation flourished as species shared knowledge freely. Cultural exchange programs allowed different civilizations to learn from each other. And in the center of it all was the memorial to Ambassador Elena Vasquez, a reminder that peace was possible, but only when all species were willing to treat each other with respect and dignity. The galaxy had learned to fear human military power, but over time they would learn to respect human commitment to justice and equality. The war that began with one diplomat's murder had ended with the birth of a new and better galactic civilization. Elena Vasquez had not lived to see her dream fulfilled, but her sacrifice had made it possible. The galaxy would never forget the price of peace or the species that had been willing to pay it.